Preservation and protection of cultural heritage. We've heard over the last few days so many of the different ways that communities are utilizing technology in teaching languages, in using commerce to invigorate interest in youth to learn traditional arts and crafts, and being able to text in native languages, as well as other ways of preserving cultural heritage. I want to introduce everyone. I think everybody already knows, almost everybody here. Actually, I don't know everybody on my panel. I have a little bit of a surprise here. Hi, nice to meet you, Sandy. Sandy, I actually did not get your bio or anything, so you'll have to tell us. So who I can introduce here is Jason Ordaz, Vanessa Roanhorse, and Brandon Benali. So what we'll first do is we'll give them a couple of minutes to talk about the work that they're doing, and then we'll just head into an organic conversation, and I hope that you as audience members will feel comfortable to come and really use this opportunity to be authentic, open, honest about cultural preservation and what you would like to see in the future. Thank you. So let's start here with Jason.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Jason Ordaz. I'm on staff at the Institute of American Indian Arts and adjunct faculty there. I got invited to this conference by Richard because of a presentation he saw that I did about 10 years ago of digitizing stereoscopic slides of images that were taken about 1885 through 1910. And so we created a website that was NEH funded. It was a 3-year project, and along with those images that were digital and 3D, we had stories, firsthand stories. So I've continued some of that work in my daily life, and also at IAI by being the staff photographer and making photographs of just about everything that happens there.
Great, thank you. Vanessa?
Hi, my name is Vanessa Roanhorse. I'm from the Navajo Nation. My company is Roanhorse Consulting, which doesn't say very much about what I do. I started this company kind of reluctantly 2 years ago. I had returned back from Chicago, being gone from this area 25 years. And upon my return, what I realized was that in a lot of conversations I was having with people around how do we address the wealth gap here in the state of New Mexico, there were very few Native people at the table. And what I decided to do was create a company that was specifically dedicated to helping Native and Indigenous individuals start and grow companies, because what I saw and what I am seeing today is that for every company that a Native American Indigenous person creates, it is a social impact, social enterprise. We're all seeking to address our socio-ecological challenges through business development and opportunity. And so the purpose of my work is for us to actually be able to grow that, because the more people who look like us, who are in positions of power and leadership, will hire more people who look like us. And for me, I'm interested in addressing that wealth gap. So that's the work I'm doing as it relates to culture and ethics. The idea is that for everything and every business and every innovative solution we create, we indigenize it, and we bring our culture and ethics to it, because there is a need for us to create an alternative pathway that doesn't have to be based in just pure capitalistic principles. We can actually do good while making money and building something for ourselves that actually reflects who we are as a people and a community in our culture. So that's me.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, yeah, hi. She Brandon Benali Dashujina. Can you only Nishlan or the Bashichin on the Gatni Dashuche or Kamba Dashanella Kitsili or the Tisos and Desh Gage De Nasha, Denahastin Akutego Nishlim. My name is Brandon. I'm the Towering House people born for the Hopi people, and I was just invited to be on this panel like an hour ago. So, so for those of you this morning who missed my somewhat flash presentation, I'll repeat the joke I gave there. Earth's tallest Hopi. I was born for the Hopi people, and so my Hopi clan is Hananangwa, the work that I do that relates to tradition and culture are my ideas of how technology can be used to be, instead of just as solely as an economic driver or a mechanism, but how it can create equitable political power within settler society and settler systems of governance, and how we can use technology as a tool to advance our philosophies of land and place, so-called tradition, and so-called culture. And I say so-called because, you know, as we said yesterday, like often when we speak of tradition, we speak of it from an anthropological museum type of thing where it must be static, it doesn't change, it's to be romanticized and to never grow, where as Native people, you know, implementing and even assimilating other ideas that are good for a healthy way of living, to create healthier families, lives, and communities that reciprocate kinship, reciprocate kinship to the land and to each other. And how does technology help to facilitate the idea of being a good relative and living to be a good relative using modern tools and technology today?
So I actually have a PowerPoint. So I'll just show a couple of the first slides.
Okay.
So I represent a not a consortium, but a partnership of an academic research team and the people of the Inuvialuit settlement region, which is in the far north of this way. So going back, we heard about the people of the Eastern Arctic yesterday, and so we're working in the far northwest of Canada, the Inuvialuit settlement region. The Inuvialuit people received their settlement back in the 80s, and a part of the process, out of that process, they developed a cultural resource center, which has a very large number of items that are resulting from that settlement, documents. They also have a publishing house where they have produce language books because they have 3 different dialects in which they work, and they wanted a digital library. So we were able to create a grant proposal with the Inuvialuit people as core members of our grant proposal. So they were with the group right from the beginning, and we were able to get a national level research grant to do research studies, but also to produce a catalog and a digital library for them to hold the digitized versions of these things that they have. We were actually able to do that, and we were able to produce a catalog or a collection that now has 4,500 things in it and is available to the people of the Inuvialuit settlement region. So the whole purpose of this was to preserve and protect cultural objects.
Great. Thank you. And I'm really happy that you brought up the issue of not just preserving, but protecting objects in particular. I think recently, well, I would say it's an ongoing issue, is the problem of looting and the problem of vandalizing. And I'm curious to know what the 4 of you think about how we can utilize technology to protect cultural heritage. And particularly as we want to be respectful of traditional values and ways of thinking.
That's a good question. And I would say, just off the top of my head, the first thing I would think of is collection spaces. For instance, like at IAIA, we have an enormous collection of student art, faculty art, 7,000, 8,000 pieces. So we are in the process of digitizing this art. That protects that art. Mm-hmm. In some cases, there are pieces there, as you all probably well know, that are not visible to certain members of clans or tribes. And we are not digitizing those this particular time, but people are invited to go actually look at them with their own 2 eyes. But I think by digitizing that collection protects some of those works of art, but is also can be made available for other people, maybe even in the community.
it's strangely, I did have this discussion with the Hatathli Association, or the Navajo, the Medicine People Association in Navajo back in 2010. I met some of the Hatathli members, and we had discussed literally building a Jedi library that would preserve songs, like to preserve songs and ceremonies and words that may become extinct. And so I met with them over one summer, and we were discussing like how could we do that would preserve the integrity of the songs and ceremonies. And so we even discussed loopholes in the ceremonies, the ceremonial songs and chants themselves that say, yeah, we could only record this much, which is important, and we could also remove this portion of the songs or ceremonies or names that prevent the song from being completed. Because once it's completed, and then it's trapped, so to speak. So when you look at a lot of Diné art and Diné items, we'll always say that Navajos have a way out. We always have a plan B. And if you look at a lot of our art and our philosophies, you always see, like, for example, on the Navajo rug, you'll always see like one line that goes out that reaches the border, and obviously that's for the essence of the rug to escape. There's always an escape. There's always a way out, and so to digitize that was one way we thought. It never really went anywhere, but it was a good, I would say, tabletop exercise where I spent the entire summer with the Hatathli Association on how would we actually go about. And so how I came into securing and protecting that actually was, like he was saying earlier, how do we prevent certain people who aren't supposed to be aware of certain songs and ceremonies? So I had to come up with user privileges, access privileges. How do we create policies and frameworks in place, like a decolonial view of who has access to what songs? And then so it became more issues of gatekeeping and introduced a lot of other issues or ideas of governance of ceremonial items, of songs and ceremonies that has been digitized. So we got so far as to even trying to acquire land and maybe even grant funding to build this Navajo Jedi library. But I think it kind of started to spook a lot of the older members of the Hatathli Association, although many of them were very supportive of this idea of creating this library, but also it's more about removing the suspicion around, this is recorded. Like I said, Navajo tradition is that we're always beaten with like a traditional stick. It's like, you can't do this, you're not supposed to do that. Whereas what I was taught in Black Mesa, Tifligene, Arizona, is that we're Native people are natural critical thinkers, analyzers, and if we don't start doing it, we're never going to learn how to do it. So,
I just want to interject one little thing. We were very successful in getting funding to build a content creation studio, is what we called it, and it's distance learning and telemedicine grant from USDA. There's quite a bit of money there to build a recording studio, and we thought it was going to be a recording studio moving forward, building new content. We have done probably 90% of our work has been archiving old content and bringing stuff off of tape onto disk or onto digital files and then storage of that. So there is money at RUS, if you can call it content creation, you can actually build a recording studio to solve some of those issues.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, because it was really like duct taped together, the whole idea of how like someone like, oh, I have a microphone or I have this and that. And it wasn't when I started to mention them to ideas like, how do we protect, how do we encrypt this? How do we prevent these songs and ceremonies from being stolen, even exploited? Like, I would hate for someone to break into our Jedi library and upload all the songs onto YouTube or something. So that created other ideas of, I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with the term air-gapped, like an air-gapped network. So an air-gapped network is basically a network that doesn't connect to the internet at all. It's its own autonomous network, computer network. So we came through all these ideas of how do we do it in a way that respectfully preserves our ceremonial songs, because a lot of these older Hatathlis, these chanters, these singers, were worried about the songs being lost. And it's still valid today. There's a lot of songs that are going extinct right now because no one knows them. There's a lot of deerway songs, hunting songs are going extinct because besides myself and my relatives, a lot of Navajo people don't hunt anymore. So we've lost those songs, majority of those songs, and some say they've even become extinct. So in a way of preserving the culture now, but to also look at how do we securely protect these items and preventing and to honor how we were taught, like, you know, because I'm from this clan or because you only know these songs, that you shouldn't be able, you haven't earned the right to learn these next higher level of songs or ceremonies yet. And so you have to take a real, instead of just like a preservation and protect, but how do we take a decolonial view of preserving our data?
So on the question of protection for the Inuvialuit, there are two things that we learned out of this. The first is that digitization of anything does not equal open access. And a lot of times when you get grants, there are strings attached that say that you will make the material open. But if you own the material, you don't have to do that, and that should be decided up front. And the other thing is that the question of who gets to see what is also something that needs to be decided up front. And right now we have this library functioning, but it is not open to the public because the Inuvialuit elders are still going through old pictures, old oral histories, deciding whether or not the material in there is for the public to see or only for the beneficiaries of the settlement, or perhaps to be dark archived and just held.
Great, thank you. If anyone has a question, please just raise your hand, get my attention, let me know. Okay, great. As I head over, I would love to hear a little bit more about conversations, intergenerational conversations. If anyone with so many millennials in the future being digital natives, if anyone has any comments on that. Thank you.
So a couple of things that we've been trying to figure is for the Navajo people, we're coming up on the 150th anniversary, is a weird word for it, of the Long Walk. And we've been working with some of the kids from the Deep School, which is a Navajo charter school in Navajo, basically Navajo, New Mexico, with them to say, can we figure out through using audio equipment to record their conversations with themselves, asking their parents and their grandparents questions about the history of the Long Walk. Because in our first round of information and learnings we heard was that many of these young kids in 8th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, no one in their family tells the story of what happened. And for some families, you don't talk about those things. And in other families, no one remembered. And so we're asking the question with these young people, with their families, with this audio equipment, how do we learn and share this information, because it's important for us to understand where we are now and what resilience looks like, but what's beyond resilience? And how does the storytelling from our own families inform that evolution from resilience to purpose, to resourcefulness? That needs to start to happen in our communities, because so much of what we're hearing from the young people is, how will I learn if they won't tell me? So that's something that's currently happening right now, and hopefully in the next 6 months we'll start to get the data and the audio, and we'll start to be able to fill in some of the stories that we're allowed to share. But also with those kids, we're going to start to help them understand basic journalism. You know, what is journalism? How can journalism be empowering? How is storytelling empowering? And then also collectively, how are your family's stories going to inform your next step forward?
And just as a front reference, we have these photos, and there's some 3D glasses going around. So if you're interested in trying the 3D glasses and looking at the photos.
Okay. Thank you for this amazing panel. Actually, it's something that I have been trying to digest for the last months. I feel that so getting connected can be empowering or self-destructing, depending on how this happens and how conscious the process is for our communities and or your communities, sorry. Me as someone that is worried about this topic, but it's your community that might be in danger. And I feel it has a lot to do with being able to own the tool instead of being able to use the tool and make it to be at your service instead of you being the thing that is being used for the tool. So the question for the panel, and shameless plug, I don't know how to say that, but anyway, we are also working on this. So if you're we're working on creating a healthy platform for communities, in particular rural or First Nation communities, to be able to exchange culture without intermediaries in a secure way, being able to say, okay, I want to share this with my community, or I want to share only this with this other community, but not with the rest of the communities. Be able to grow culture organically as we have been used to do, but being empowered by this technology. So if any wants to help or walk together this path, let's get together. But my question is, being conscious about this issue, right? I mean, right now, internet for me is kind of Columbus, but not 3, but 1,000 or 10,000 potentially ships coming to our shores, you know? So we need to be able to relate with that. I mean, it's a lot of, not 3, but 10,000, because it's a lot of resources that can also come to us, right? So we need to be able to consciously say, okay, Columbus has a lot of bads, but also a lot of goods. How do we relate with this culture that is coming? How do we relate with this culture that is already here also? In order to have a healthy relationship, not a toxic relationship, that allows us to grow our culture in new ways, because, the cell phone is something new, and not new, but maybe, I don't know, new things, like things that are not in our culture, and we can absorb it or not, but it's our choice. But how we do this in a healthy way, or if you have had this question and we can work together.
Are you asking about the balance? How do you balance new technologies and?
I would say it's not about new technologies and old technologies, but the implications of having internet as a potential cultural conquest, a new and destructive layer of.
I'll just say briefly, I think the first word I think about is respect. And at IIA, some of the classes that I've been involved in and some of the mentorships that I've done with some of the students, it's really talking about the kind of respect that the students would have, and I'm talking really specifically about art, but that can translate to other things as well. If some of the students who are coming through IAI are informed and they have respect about what is okay to show and what is not, I think that would be a good starting point, and maybe that will ripple through some of the other student body. And I'm just speaking specifically about IAIA. That's my thought on that.
I think the most important thing is your new stereotype of the Indigenous person as being the tech-savvy person. People need to know that what they put on the internet is out there forever and for anyone to look at. And but people need to know that, and people need to be in control and maintain the control of their cultural resources. And if you do that and you actively practice that, then you have a better chance of making sure that that picture of your grandfather in regalia doesn't show up in the middle of somebody's car ad,
So to address the 1,000 Columbuses, I would say for the past 525 years, we've been resisting and fighting one Columbus after another. Imperialism from the 3 largest imperialist nations to ever exist. We've fought them, and we've also learned, like you said, I'd say there's nothing, it can be not subjective, but we can go into a whole different conversation whether Columbus brought anything good, which he didn't. He brought nothing good to this hemisphere. And that would bring into question, so like what's a good, healthy life, right? Is it from a Eurocentric view, or is it from an indigenous perspective on this hemisphere? So I would say that we had it pretty good before Columbus came. So I don't think he brought anything good. But the reality is, for settlers and white folks, European Americans who are in this room, you know, you're not responsible for what your ancestors did, but you are responsible for the society that you benefit from today. And so with that in mind, how can we use technology to be good relatives to each other? Because when I speak from Native liberation perspective or decolonial perspective, it's not about kicking everyone off the land and sending them back across the ocean. Being a good relative means, like, how do we reciprocate kinship in a meaningful way, and how do we use technology to reciprocate good kinship that recognizes native land, place, and philosophies in this hemisphere. And I think technology has, like I said earlier, has really offered us tools to not worry about Columbuses, because like I said, Native people were pretty smart, and we've been figuring out how to live with 1 million, like literally 300 million Columbuses that are living around us. But we've also found ways to use technology to persevere, and not just persevere, and not just to simply survive, because, you know, in our peace treaties, in our treaties with the United States, from a Diné Navajo perspective, we were promised peace. I don't see this as peace. Like, Native people are being murdered by the police at higher rates than any other demographic. And that's not to say that there's an oppression Olympics. I'm just saying that, you know, this isn't, brown, black, and indigenous people are facing the brunt of what Columbus brought, but we're using tools and technology today to have our voice, to be represented in the larger society, in settler society. And so there's a way to politicize technology. It's a tool. It's basically who controls that tool, who swings that hammer, basically. Am I going to swing it to smash structures of white supremacy, colonialism, and heteropatriarchy, or am I going to use it to build and support those structures? And there's many ways that we can use this tool to preserve our, not only just to, we have to preserve our songs and ceremonies, definitely, so that we can maintain our language. But just because I don't speak Navajo fluently or anymore at all doesn't make me less Navajo. Just because I don't know certain songs and ceremonies doesn't make me less Navajo, it'll make me less Diné. So, because being indigenous is a political identity. It's not founded on the language I speak or the songs that I know. It's about my place in this hemisphere, although it is important, but I don't think we should always center our place as Native people solely on knowing our language and our songs and ceremonies. And so, in regards to protecting what we have, like I said, is using modern methodologies and IT security governance policies in place now to reconfigure them or to complement Native ideas and philosophies of protection, and to have and I think this is brand new. Like, what does decolonized cybersecurity look like? You know, what does decolonized IT look like? And I think, like, Canada is doing a lot of great leeway work in that with OCAP, with protection of First Nations data, and also, like, I'd like to see more Native people, Indigenous people, allies, and accomplices get together and discuss that even further, because you're right. Like, you're a relative of mine. I want you to have a good and healthy life, and I want to use technology in a way that we can both reciprocate kinship between each other.
Thank you, Brandon. We'll go over to Nan, and then we'll go to Evelyn. And if there's anyone back there, just let me know.
Yeah, mic 2. I'm Nan Rubin, up from Las Cruces. I actually have 2 questions I want to just sort of ask the whole panel to respond to if you can. I've worked very closely at the Museum of the American Indian at the Smithsonian on several preservation projects. And there were 2 things that came up that are pretty consistent, I think, in terms of any kind of archive or preservation issue. The first one is that just digitizing something or digitizing an image of it isn't preservation. in a lot of ways, a digital image can be very fragile and doesn't last too long in terms of the rapid changes in the technology, in the ability to play back the images or store the images. So you sort of have to think about that in terms of long-term maintenance, or 5 years from now, you won't be able to retrieve the images if you're not really planning what it means to migrate or change those things as the technology is changing. And the second thing is, I'm going to say this dreaded word, metadata, which means how are you developing records for that objects that you're digitizing so that people can find them, name them, retrieve them, etc., when you want to be able to access that stuff. And one of the things at the Museum of the American Indian, I don't know if people here are very familiar with the history of it, the collection was started with 1 million objects that were created by this guy. They called him a boxcar collector. You can imagine he kind of came to these regions where there were native communities and just sort of swept everything up and threw them in trolleys and boxcars and trucks and I don't know what, and hauled them off. And there were literally, his name was George Gustav High, and there were literally no records about these objects, where they came from, how old they were, where they, who made them, what they were used for. A lot of them were everyday household kinds of objects and things like this. This is from all over North and South America. And the museum has been trying to figure out what some of these things are, how they're used, where they came from, if they're sacred objects, what that means in terms of how they should be handled, etc. So they have this policy of any native person who wants to go to their warehouse and look at the objects and be able to tell them whatever they can about what's there. But that means collecting all these things in some fashion with metadata and hopefully being able to help restore some of the meaning of the collection.
I'll speak to the metadata. As part of our project, we have a PhD student who's working on the concept of culturally appropriate metadata. And for example, we have incorporated more regional and local terms. So instead of the word Inuit, we're using Inuvialuit. Instead of the word parka, we use the word parki, which is the word that the Inuvialuit use. We also are cataloging in all 3 languages, both cataloging, we're including both content in all 3 dialects, but we're also adding catalog terms in those 3 dialects. What's really important about the metadata is first that it's applied, and that it's applied by someone who does actually know what the object is, and secondly, that it respects the cultural traditions of the people who used or owned the object.
Great, thank you, Sally. Anybody else on the panel want to touch this? No. Okay. Evelyn.
Excuse me, thank you. I just wanted to throw out an idea that is prevalent in the circles in which I work. It's becoming more so. Oh, okay. An idea that is becoming more prevalent in the circles in which I work. Getting rid of this notion of survival. I've worked with tribes all over the United States and in Canada for years. And throughout my experience, I have been told, observed, whatever. There seems to be this tribal ethos that runs across everybody. And it is that the people must continue. And that has a different quality about what's ahead of us, what is with us presently, than survival. Survival kind of imputes a victim. And I think one of the important things that we need to do in line with that is to just erase this notion of the vanishing Indian, the pictures and the thinking like that. And I think that at least in my experience, when I think that way, and I do think that way, it changes the way that I approach. It changes my understanding of what I'm encountering. And I just wanted to throw that out.
Does anyone Vanessa?
I agree. I feel like so much of my work when I meet young or interested Native people who want to start a company, who have an idea, they've come up with something and they're excited and they want to do something about it. The biggest challenge we have is this belief gap. There's this cavernous space in which this person is stuck, feeling oppressed by the colonization, as well as this narrative we keep being told by outside people about our own story. And so much of what needs to happen from my perspective is that, yes, Native people, Indigenous people are resilient. Yes, we are. But you know what's beyond resilience? Because that's where I want to be. What's beyond equity? What's beyond equity is freedom. What's beyond resilience is that we have purpose and we are resourceful. And so for me, so much of this conversation on protection and culture and ethics is trying to help our Indigenous business owners and entrepreneurs and innovators and youth is to take that shroud off of them. And so when you know you're ready to do something, you want to start a business, there's so many tools, there's so much technology, there's so many processes that have to be done, but those are just tools. They have nothing to do with the idea and the opportunity. And so to me, it's, if we as a people can't move beyond that, you know, we're sort of in a cyclical conversation with ourselves. And so I don't know what more to say. I just, you know, I feel very strongly about that. And that's the work that I'm so focused on, which is to help my community realize that there is nothing stopping you, that this belief gap is made up, and that in our histories and in our DNA, everything about us is we are troubleshooters, we are innovators, we are rabble-rousers, we are hackers, and that's who we are. And so if we can embrace that, you know, the culture and the ethics will come with it.
Thank you.
I think when we talk about victimization, I don't like to play the victim either, but we also have to do what we can to understand structures of power that prevent Native people from living full and healthy, dignified lives. There is economic racism. There is resource extraction racism. Speaking from where I'm from, my family's from Black Mesa, Arizona. In a land where we've been ravaged by coal mining. For those of you who don't know what Black Mesa is, Black Mesa coal mining, Peabody coal feeds coal via slurry, using some of the freshest water on earth to create a coal slurry to the so-called Navajo generating station. And the Navajo generating station provides power to pumps in the Central Arizona project that pumps water from the Colorado River to the Southwest. Basically, Navajo coal, Navajo water has built the Southwest, like literally did, because it pumps water from the Colorado River to Los Angeles, to Phoenix, to Tucson, to Yuma, to, I mean, 80% of our cabbage comes from Yuma, Arizona in the United States. And that's because water is pumped from the Colorado River from Navajo coal. So there are valid structures of power in place that prevent us from living a life on our terms alone, because we're limited to, it seems like we're limited and it's time to resource extraction industries. We're limited to casinos, we're limited to the military. But instead of like always being stuck in that mode, like you said, to me, I activate and I always advocate the activization of our natural abilities as Native people through our philosophies to not just survive. And I love that, like you brought that up, because Native people are just surviving now, and we're not in a better socioeconomic state just by simply surviving. I don't advocate simply surviving. I advocate total liberation for all Native and non-Native people who are oppressed by structures of power that are created to create hierarchies of class and status of one over the other. So I think it's important to recognize that there are hierarchies that exist that are enforced by violence. and how technology can help us to set that balance in place, to correct those hierarchical structures in place, to just because, like, I always tell people our goal as human beings shouldn't be to make a lot of money and then die. You know, our goal as human beings should be to create healthier lives and communities for ourselves and our families. Just from being a native perspective, a native place, just because we have a woman CEO doesn't mean that patriarchy doesn't exist anymore. Or just because there's a native president of the United States doesn't mean that imperialism and war and everything else ceases to exist. So we have to always question these structures of power that prevent one set of people from living healthy, good, and good lives versus why another class of citizens lives an ultra lifestyle that just takes and takes and takes. And technology can help us to not bridge the gap. I don't want to become a billionaire with, you know, I just want to raise my children in a good, healthy environment where they're seen as a human being first and not just a native person from the res. And so that's what I strive to use technology to create that community.
Great, thank you. That's okay. Well, Gar is next. Your question, please.
Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Gar Clark, I'm the geospatial and broadband guy for the New Mexico. And just some information, too. I'm also on what's called the National Geospatial Advisory Committee. It's a federal committee that advises the Federal Geographic Data Committee on geospatial technologies and standards and policy. And we have a subcommittee that's called the Cultural and Historical Resources Subcommittee, run by two tribal guys, Garrett Couch and Frank Arjo. And one of the things that the reason why we have this committee is because cultural resources, and when we look at archaeological sites in the geospatial environment, it's important that that information be cloistered into a protected environment. But what's interesting is that along the federal agencies, there are policies in place to protect that information. However, they aren't necessarily being followed. And one of the big questions is what should be protected and what can be public. And that's a big policy question right there. And so we're working on this on the federal level, but there is a telescope down into local communities in thinking about the same types of structure that is required, which is what can be public and what cannot be public. And in the federal government and the agencies, there doesn't seem to be a real standard in that. Some data is being released which should not be released as a request. So I wanted to bring that up just as something that we're working on in that area. Also, most of you know that that each state has equivalent to an archaeological resource management system, and that is passcode protected normally and should be, and that in looking at how they do and protect information, because there's federal requirements associated with that, it might be good to look at that and parrot some of that or not parrot some of that too. So anyhow, policy is really important, but following it is exceptional. And thank you for the word metadata. It's a love-hate relationship, but it's really important.
Does anyone on the panel have comments for what Gar?
For many years, I was a map librarian, and there were certain U.S. Geological Survey maps that we could not get because they had classified information on them. And in my naivete, I always thought that those were sacred sites and that USGS was protecting the sacred sites. And then somebody pointed out to me that it was actually the dams that would be taken out by terrorists that were being hidden, not sacred sites.
I think it's sacred to some. I think what should happen is all that data should be collected, and then full possession should be given to the native people whose data was collected for, and then have them decide, and to also have a native seat at the table at the federal level who's sitting in these committees to be part of that decision-making process. I'm trying not to say a process because I'm surrounded by so many Canadians, so I'm picking up the vernacular.
David?
I just wanted to comment on, and actually the woman up there hit on it, it's the notion of controlling the narrative. I think that's really important, and it's part of the preservation. Because for myself, as a black American, the narrative has always been, you're the descendant of African slaves, and that's it. But my narrative is actually much broader and much greater than that. I'm also the descendant of Native Americans. I'm also the descendant of Europeans. So basically, I have the same narrative as everyone in this room, and then some. But because, right, we've been told certain things for a certain amount of time, and it's continuous kind of reinforced, the information about maybe Native Americans, the information about black people, Asians, whoever it might be, right, things get suppressed and people don't learn certain things about you, and then you become segmented and put into a box. And I think really the artifacts and the information and the control of that narrative is probably the more critical aspect of it, and is what's going to actually allow people to be empowered.
Okay. Anyone want to make a comment on David's? No? Okay.
Hi, so I'll apologize, this is going to be poorly formed, because this has been an incredibly interesting panel, and I'm like just mulling and machining through things. One thing that resonated with me was your comment about a thing that I've called the ambition gap. Being from a rural part of the US, there's just an idea that that's for other people. There are things that are done by people who are not from where I was, Alaska. Like, Alaskans don't go and do things. You like, you know. And I guess I see a little bit of a tension in a way with trying to resolve that. To say that, I think the comment of you don't want to be a billionaire, is it okay to want to be a billionaire? If that's the ambition. So the first, the core question is, what are the ambitions you have that you feel aren't present? The ambitions that you would like the community to have more of, that you're pushing for? And then maybe a bit onto whether that aligns with your vision of what people should be trying to do.
Sure. So, you know, I look really at just basic infrastructures for Native people to be able to launch a company. Let's just use it in that space. One thing I know is we and I can't speak for the First Nations communities, but in the Southwest here, you know, a lot of our communities here don't actually promote business as a viable way or as a way to self-determine your future. You know, oftentimes we've lived in extraction mentality for so long, and whether it's physical resources from the ground or extraction of our human bodies, but like what has happened, so when I think of belief gap and I think of businesses who want to start, you know, in our own communities, we actually don't have basic systems in place to support that. Like essential systems, like here's where you go to get a business registration. Here's where you can open your company in this space on your tribal lands, which is why so many folks have to leave to do any of that. Separately, I feel like when I think about ambition and the belief gap, to me, it has so much to do about the fact that like we don't see ourselves as entrepreneurs. And I'm going to use that word, which can be a dirty word for some people, you know, but I'm going to use that word because to me, entrepreneur doesn't have to be business specific. Entrepreneurial is a mindset, right? And so we don't see ourselves taking those leaps of saying, this is a problem, I figured out a solution. Instead of looking for someone outside to come and do the same solution, I can do it. And again, it has to do with basic infrastructure. So how do we bridge those things? You know, what do I want to see? I want to see tons of Native business owners starting companies, developing something, creating something, selling something, making something, so that we no longer have to leave our tribal lands to get anything, so that we can actually be out there competing. Not only just for money, but competing for the fact that like this is our land, and we should have access to those opportunities. But more importantly, if we allow more indigenous businesses to do this, we change the way business can be done. We change because we bring ourselves, we bring this concept of the past as part of who we are, and we take it into the future. And what we touch, we don't take too much from it. That's what business should look like. from my perspective, there's a new way and new business models that can be created, and indigenous business or indigenous philosophies is the future of business.
I agree a lot with what she said, because what should we call an entrepreneur? Maybe I'll call revolutionary, like someone who can actually change, make meaningful changes. And so I'm not going to berate someone for wanting to put food on their table. I'm not going to berate someone who works in the mine or joins the military, because there are material conditions and needs that Native people or brown, black, indigenous people have to meet in order to survive, right? In order to feed our family or to build confidence in ourselves, to have and the reality is in this day and age, financial conditions facilitate that confidence in people. Whereas as far as ambition goes, I can part upon them, and which I've been telling other folks is that, because I have a side business. I'm a business consultant. I do network security consulting, digital forensics, and malware analysis. And so there are ways that I maneuver around this system to provide for my family, while at the same time I still have the freedom and ability to speak about there are alternative ways of living healthier, dignified lives. And if you need to start now, if you're a Native person and you need to start a business for you to be a healthy person, for your family to be healthy, that's perfect. Because that's what I want. I don't want us to maintain this victim mode. I want us to create healthier lives and families and communities, but to also question, where does that take us? Like, so I want to make money to create a healthier life and family and community. What's the next step after that? Am I just going to stop at creating a healthy life for myself, which sometimes is needed? Am I going to work towards creating a healthier life for my family? Or am I going to move further on and create a healthier life for my relatives and my community? And how do I contribute to that healthy life? Maybe it's a Native business. We don't know. I do know that there are material conditions that need to be met, and I'm not going to browbeat and hit someone with the revolutionary stick, saying you're supporting the capitalist system that's destroying lives and communities. That's purity politics. I don't play into that. Although capitalism is a violent structure, and we all tacitly are involved in it through even just going onto Facebook. But it doesn't mean that we have to accept it. We have to accept that this is the way it's always going to be. We don't have to accept this toxic relationship that we have with settler society, with capitalism, with colonialism, and with patriarchy. We don't have to accept that it's wrong and to exist and to let it continue to exist. We can dare to dream. We can dare to envision a future where I don't have to worry about destroying the earth or exploiting other people to have a healthy life for myself. So it's more or less about daring to dream bigger than myself or my immediate issues and problems. It's about daring to dream, not just a dream, but to create a reality where we don't have to rely on me exploiting you and you exploiting me, or me destroying your land and you're destroying my land. There are healthier ways of being good relatives to each other. But for the material conditions now, I support Native businesses, because that's what's going to get food on their table, that's going to get their kids in school and education, and to have them, provide them access and tools and technologies, but to always remember that this isn't the only way to live to be a good and healthy life.
Thank you. We're going to be finishing this up soon. One of the things I'd like to hear from the panel about is how can Indigenous communities leverage relationships both inside and outside of the Indigenous community to, and the work that's being done in various places to help make protection and preservation of culture happen now. Jason?
I mean, that is such a broad question in a way. And I'm an image maker, and that's what I do. And so I'll speak to it in that regard. And I'm going to go back to really starting from the one thing that we all have right now, which is a moment. and to really focus on the moment, capturing a moment. If you want to take it a step further, again, going to a collection, bringing in the right people from young to old who have the knowledge to share. In terms of this panel, I mean, capturing an image, making an image, preserving an image. I agree with this woman's comment back here that digital images are fragile and they're changing all the time, but then again, so are analog images. I'm not sure what of the two which are better, but I would say to start with, in terms of what your question was related to, is capturing a moment, preserving the moment, documenting the moment. That's what I would say.
Vanessa? Pass the mic along.
I guess I would just say that I think as Indigenous people, we don't recognize our social capital, and that we are very connected, and that our work across communities, there is lots of opportunities for us to come together and support each other, but more importantly, that to have a collective voice with honor of the fact that we all come from unique communities, but finding that collective space to join together is really important. Other communities and cultures have done it very successfully, and we can see where some of them are. You know, how can we look at our social capital not as a dirty word or as something that glosses over all of us and puts us under the moniker of Native Americans or Indigenous people, but that we have to recognize that this connection, these new relatives, to use Brandon, which is just really resonating with me, not only because I'm Navajo, but feels good, is how do we keep this going? What happens after this? So that's something I would say is how do we continue that to ensure this happens, this conversation, and that we're not just, not to be offending anyone here, but we're not a subcommittee of culture, that we are talking about culture and relevance of culture at the very top of every discussion.
So I'll speak specifically to our project, which was the Inuvialuit leveraging their relationship with the university, which is a very old one. And I think the most important thing was that the Inuvialuit recognize their strength, their ownership right up front, and worked with us as equal partners. And they recognized that their needs were very different from ours as academics. So we had two groups, the Inuvialuit needing a library that was going to have a very long lifespan, where the academics have a 5-year grant window, and we knew that this group, the academics, were going to be ending. And so the important thing in leveraging that relationship was both groups laying out very clearly what their needs and expectations were, and what the rules were going to be around the project, and how the ending was going to happen so that the academics could pull out, but the Inuvialuit could continue with their project. And they did a really good job of managing that.
Okay, that's a great answer. These are all great responses and great questions. The simple thing is to be a good relative. That's the simplest way, like to reciprocate like meaningful kinship. To me, Santa Fe is like the epitome of a bad relative. Because, you know, if you look at the exploitation that happens here, we like to pretend that Santa Fe is a good relative, but in reality, like most of the Pueblo tribes around here are living in poverty-level conditions. So to be like meaning, like to, okay, for a settler society in border towns to have like a meaningful look in the mirror and say, am I living in a way that's good and healthy for not just myself, but for the Native people and Indigenous people whose territories I'm on or live nearby? Like to have a really honest conversation with themselves, because Native people, I think we're tired of constantly educating. It's like a person who is a victim of abuse and violence to educate their perpetrators on how to not abuse me anymore, you know? So I think a lot of that self-education on how to be a good relative, settlers, European Americans, and folks who live in border towns have to take on, like in a meaningful way, take on what does it mean to be a good person, to be a good neighbor? And am I living in my principles and values from wherever I'm from, whether I'm a Christian or whatever background that you have, cultural background you have, are you honestly living up to those values and principles yourselves? Because Native people, we've been telling you, we've been giving you answer after answer what it means to be a good relative. And so far, I think this is another great collection of people who are understanding that idea of what it means to be a good relative, but now instead of just understanding it, like acting on it and actually doing it, actually living to aspire to be a good relative to the Native people, Indigenous people, or just all oppressed people in general. So that's my best answer for that.
Great, thank you. One, we want to just have Jason tell you a little bit about his project, and anyone who's interested in, go ahead, Jason.
So you saw some of these stereoscopic images up here, red cyan 3D images, which were part of this project from 2003 to 2007 at the School for Advanced Research, where we digitized some of these stereo slides. Look like this from late 1800s or so. And if anybody's interested, you can see some of the originals, and I will have them up here, and you can take a look at, if you're interested, at some of the slides that I have been, I want to use the right word here, keeping safe, I guess, over here. And at some point, I'll certainly donate them probably to the museum, II or SAR or something like that. But if you're interested, you can take a look over here with stereopticon. Some of you may have heard that term. Some of you may have not.
Thank you. So that's it.
A round of applause for the panel. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. So what I want to do now, we're going to have our next panel, but the next panel is a heavyweight panel. So what I want to do is I want to introduce